Yeah, thank you for coming today. I want to give a little introduction or overview today about my PhD project I'm going to conduct. So I'm still in a pre-field work stage, but I did some pilot study, a short pilot study in the beginning of 2015. And in the whole, my PhD project aims to observe and to analyze the social cultural dimensions of Taekwondo and the embodiment of it to create equality. Especially, I'm going to focus on Taekwondo in Buenos Aires, in Argentina, and its effects on the life outside the dojo. So the presentation today describes the adoption of Taekwondo as a vehicle for social inclusion and also a little bit its dangers it's going through now. I'm going to describe predominantly what I have done by now, so far, and in this realm, economical and political circumstances dictate the success or the failure of the wish to create equal opportunities. So what is equality is, of course, one of the first questions, but before solving these questions, I want to tell you a short fairy tale. So, once upon a time, there was a great Taekwondo instructor. He's still alive, and he went to a shoe shining boy. And in terms of paying this shoe shining boy, he invited him afterwards to his classes. And nowadays, or in 2012, there has been the ITF Taekwondo instructor course, the international instructor course in Buenos Aires. And we see over here the instructor, and in the middle, the shoe shining guy performing one of the patterns to be an acknowledged instructor, an internationally acknowledged instructor. So the social position of the shoe shiner has been completely reverted. Instead of looking down on the shoe shining boy, now everybody is looking up to a shining example of Taekwondoing. This fairy tale-like story is one of the examples that turns Argentina into an interesting site to research the apprenticeship of Taekwondo. Nowadays, this young man became an instructor himself. He did not become rich, but he obtained a new social position. Hence, Taekwondo is not only a vehicle for social inclusion, but also for equality. So what does equality mean? More or less, equality can be, is constituted by meeting different bodies. In such, Taekwondo has to face an opponent who is categorized by rank, belt, sex, weight, and age when they meet in a competition. But conversely, on the training sides, apprentices create a culture of equality by accepting and learning to exercise with a partner. So imagine how the middle-class peers must have looked when the shoe-shining boy has entered for the first time the dojo. So here, I understand equality in the area of practice as a mean of acceptance and respectful interaction with different bodies, evoking the idea of a complex equality, as Raven Connell puts it. On a broader level, equality is invoked in the practice's erosion of racial and sex discrimination through education and sometimes social mobility. And this leads me to ask, why Argentina? So for my MA, I conducted anthropological research in Argentina with cardboard collectors, which means people who go into the street to recycle paper and recyclables and to sell these things afterwards in their neighborhoods. And I was doing, in my free time, some Taekwondo classes in the city center, but over the course of the fieldwork it became very obvious that I have not been the only one practicing martial arts or Taekwondo. Especially the kids of the cartoneros, which we see here on the pictures on the left, were attending Taekwondo classes in their neighborhoods, in the shanty towns, which were mostly WTF, the Olympic style that Martin just presented. And some of the mostly adolescents were attending ITF lessons in the neighborhoods nearby. And these neighborhoods in northern Buenos Aires, where I was located, is an area where gated communities, as well as shantytowns, are geographically really nearby, but very invisible, especially to an outsider like me, invisible, but yet effective boundaries limit interaction across class, ethnicity, and to some extent gender. So that was in 2012, and I kept on wondering about how come these Asian martial arts, especially Taekwondo, are so popular to the population in Argentina. So why do you train boys and girls, adolescents, business managers, and cardboard collectors? Of course, I was reading Loic Wacon's Body and Soul, and I was very inspired by the context that has been displayed. But the US context, where discrimination is more structurally grown, as Peter Wade would put it, is we have to now look on the context of Latin America, where discrimination is very much more ambiguous. So Wacon portrays in his ethnography about boxers in Chicago's the boxing club as a space to create sociability. This sociability is thus created in a more or less homogeneous networks, or the ethnic group, which means here, in his case, the black ghetto. In Argentina, these ethnic contrasts are much less visible, and the gyms I visited showed more heterogeneities in terms of class. So people who dodge to pay the fare for the public transport, or shoe shining boys, enter the training together with people who arrive in their Mercedes-Benz, or even with a driver. Furthermore, wearing the uniform, the dobok, as we see it here, dims the outside markers of difference, and one alters the position one holds in the city. Here, class, as well as to some extent gender relations and perceptions, can be subverted in the doorjang, or how would you tell to which social class these people belong on the pictures? So additionally, Wacon also underpins the reason why one starts practicing martial arts. Hence, boxing in a ghetto club means to cope with the outside world. But the ghetto club did not aim to prepare the members in terms of self-defense, so they were not told what to do on the streets. So to sum it up, one gets the sense of how dangerous it is in the streets, in certain areas in the streets of Chicago, and one senses the inequality that restricts people of color to enter white spaces. Also in Buenos Aires, violence, especially in the past, let's say, 15 years, became more and more brutal, and people are much more attentive of not being assaulted in the street, and this is why one creates these invisible boundaries to limit interaction. So, is self-defense the incentive to learn martial arts in Argentina? I was wondering about that doing this pilot study in 2015 and analyzing the interviews I've been mostly conducting and following the social media discourses. It showed how the practitioners, especially the instructors, created a very inclusive discourse. Interestingly, the motivations and incentives have been transforming over the generations. So it started in the late 60s when it came to Argentina. The generation at that time has been attracted by the idea of the learning the movements they saw on TV, by the athletic movements like Bruce Lee and the series Kung Fu that was quite popular in Argentina too. It's a little bit like what we heard yesterday. It has been promoted to a middle class, mostly to a university middle class, and a secondary effect of the promotion to these people has been the idea of self-defense. From the 80s on, after the last dictatorship in Argentina, Taekwondo recovered practitioners, and especially parents understood martial arts as a good manner to teach their kids the tenets of Taekwondo, what you have said in your presentation before. But besides of instructing children self-defense, it was actually something good to tell children and teach them discipline and respect and all these kinds. And these kids are now grown up, and some of them became instructors themselves. And so they're sending their kids, if they have them already, to learn Taekwondo, but they added something more up to it. And here the idea and the notion of care plays a big role. It's not only the care to their own child, but the care to the whole society. Hence, the schools that are economically more or less independent, which means the instructors have another source of income, adopt also children and practitioners who may not be able to pay the full fee. Consequently, what happened in the past few years is that sports, especially martial arts, are increasingly often used as a tool to create equality in, as I mentioned before, a segregated society where the fear of being assaulted increased and attacks recently became more violent. So, these attacks that are violent, everybody wants to protect their body from such an assault, but only through a very skilled vision, one is able to distinguish the different body languages. And this may lead, on the one hand, to a criminalization of certain people they see on the streets, but on the other hand, it is also a tool to evade an attack, so by changing the side of the street. But what do I mean here? Something similar happens now in the dojang. In the dojang, the apprentices do the same. They learn to watch and understand the quick and invisible movements of the combat system. Hence, one acquires the abilities to anticipate the movements of their training partners. But it is not longer applied as a form of self-defense, but mostly as a form to improve yourself and maybe win the next competition. And all in all, that means to permeate boundaries and understand the partner's body language. And now imagine the shoe-shining guy who might be criminalized is now your training partner. How this can evolve. So these body languages emerge into something new, and they create a new form of understanding. So what I want to display here is, first are some more examples I gathered from the field work. So all of the interviewed coaches who have only been ITF coaches pointed out to me that their main target is to facilitate social inclusion and to create sociability within the class. So something similar, as you described it, happens also in Argentina. They invite them to barbecues, they try to create sociability, but most of all because they have this idea of competition, this bringing people forward, they also pay sometimes the fare or the admission fee to the tournaments they can participate, or they redistribute the ideas of, they redistribute the funding for the competition itself when they have to go by bus there, or the train fee. And this picture, for example, is an advertisement for a bingo that has been initiated by the trainer of the boy on this picture, because he was qualified to go to the World Championship in Italy in 2015. But it exceeded absolutely the financial resources of his trainer, so he couldn't pay for him either. And what they did was then little bingos, little actions to fundraise, to do fundraising and finance the dream of this boy. Another coach who is the head of several schools in Buenos Aires, Fernando, he has them in different parts of the city. One is, or some are nearby shanty towns, and some are more in the center of Buenos Aires. And he presented himself a little bit like a Robin Hood who redistributes the money, who takes it from the central clubs and gives it a little bit to the clubs that are outside. And these these discourses have been quite present when I was there in the beginning of 2015. But what I have to point out here, all the interviewed ones have been economically quite independent. So they have been teachers or personal trainers, business managers, and all this. But what happens if you are dependent on instructing Taekwondo as your full-time job? In the moment when I was there, the Ministry of Social Development in Argentina had only acknowledged the Olympic Taekwondo style, so what you presented, the cookie style, as a national game, which signed clubs in marginal areas of the city on a scheme to receive financial support, as I mentioned, with the Cartonero people who were attending in their neighborhoods, the clubs. And a couple of months after the pilot study, the Taekwondoin, especially the ITF ones, turned into political actors. Why? Because there was they renewed the law, the sports law in Argentina, which also signed now ITF Taekwondo as a martial art on the list. So they wanted to be included just to have the protection of a sports law, because it's something different than just being a dangerous martial art. So now, WTF as well ITF clubs can sign up more easily to receive funding and to become one of these independent and passionate instructors as the instructors I presented before. But what happens? In Argentina, most of the clubs are ITF clubs. And some political struggles came up. A couple of weeks after the law passed, a new government has been elected, which is now challenging the rationale of Fernando and all the other instructors I interviewed. First, many laws are being cancelled or came into revision. This means that Argentinians now face quickly changing legislations, and they have to adapt to all these new situations. For example, there is the tarifazo going on right now. The tarifazo is an increase of the running costs as, for example, water, electricity, public transport, and gas for a couple of 100%. And lately, now in the past month, in the Argentinian winter, many of the clubs didn't know how to pay these running costs. But also, it urged families to reassess their spendings on the free time activities for their kids. Which leads me now to reformulate the questions I'm going to have when I go back into the field next year for about a question. So this is, I'm asking me now, how are the schools financially maintained in this political and economical situations? To what extent may the ethos and practice of the dojang still emerge as a technique of the body to assert equality? Do inclusivity and equality become an ephemeral or disappearing phenomena in sports, especially martial arts practice? How do people and clubs adapt to the ephemerality and quick changes? I'm asking this because all these big words of inclusivity and creating equal opportunities and equality through Taekwondo from the last year became very, very silent in the past few months. And I don't know if I will be hearing more of these recent, or more and more recent, of these fairy tale-like stories, as I gave the example in the beginning of the talk, of the shoe shining guy. Thank you very much for your attention, and thanks to the collaboration of the Taekwondoin for the pictures and for giving me feedback. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks again to Henrike Neuhaus, who gave us an insight on creating cultures of equality in Argentina. Thank you very much. Now, who wants to share their opinion, or if you have any questions, now's the time to do that. We start here.
Yeah, firstly, thank you for the talk. And my question would be, do you think that this creating of equality is like really something like a vision statement for them, or is it something that just is there, or that just occurs because of how Taekwondo is structuralized by, by the governing bodies or whatever?
I think there has been a shift. So over this, especially due to this change of government. So before, it was a great goal for sports in general. We have to create inclusivity, especially sports. Let's say football has always been the notion of we are inclusive. But what happens with Asian martial arts is that everybody can do it. So we do not have a football team for girls that should empower girls. We have a Taekwondo team constituted by girls and boys who then go all together to the tournaments. And these boys and girls come from different backgrounds, and that was the main goal, because especially to face these changes as violence became much more pressing in Argentina. So there were much more stories and news about, oh, there has been an assault on a bus, and the first thing they did, instead of telling the bus driver to stop, they cut off his finger and things. So the violence was increasing and getting much worse in the last years than it had been, let's say, 10 years before and after the last dictatorship. So there's always been violence, but the violence, how it is applied, is shifting now as well.
Please.
I thought that was fantastic and incredibly rich, really well conceptualized. I have two questions, and they're kind of connected. One is about the word equality, because I think that I would want to challenge that. I don't think inclusivity and equality are the same, but I agree with I kind of agree with the way that you're using it, but and I know what you mean. Everyone goes in there, they put on their white robot, and then they're no longer from the get-go or from the hills, but wherever. But this is that's the bit that I would really go after, because this is like you're using Bourdieu, and I would think, well, Rancière's critique of Bourdieu is that there is no creation of equality. Any effort to create equality only produces inequality. However, I get your point. But then my question is, in your experience in the dojo, everyone's wearing a white suit, everyone might have the same, everyone might be a green belt. But are there subgroups? Because people can go, yeah, you're from the game community, and you're the shoe shining boy. And or is that not something that happens?
Yes, absolutely, that happens. So I became aware of all this topic because I did all the errors, let's say, or the mistakes one does when a novice comes into the club. I was talking to them in this way. Oh, and I was asking them, oh yeah, and where do you come from? Oh, do you travel there by bus? You don't ask these questions. But this was after I've been immersed a little bit longer into the club, and I got more confidence to everybody. So they had specific and especially invisible ways of going around a form of interaction, but it was then up to the instructors that these people are included into the group and creating the sociability. And so there are different forms of practices which are then challenged. But I think here this is an area where usually people from precarious backgrounds are restricted to enter, usually, but they are now entering. And what you said about equality and inclusivity, I think inclusivity is a form of being included into the group, and equality is this kind of bodily constitution that then is happening during the pairing up. So I would try to pair up with a person that is bodily equally constituted, but might be from a completely different background. But we have to deal with all these backgrounds, because maybe this person is bodily equally constituted, but violently or having different, yeah, there are some differences that may appear because of the background they bring in. That they are maybe used to punch a little bit harder or softer or don't evade the kicks and these things. Yes. And did that answer your question? Good.
All right, in the back there.
I appreciate the presentation. So I'm just wondering, isn't social inclusion or social, let's say, a part of martial arts training, especially Asian martial arts? So how is it different from other martial arts styles? Is there any unique aspect in Taekwondo that promotes equality that other Asian martial arts classes is unable to? For example, like the same equalizing effect in Wing exercise like Chi so promotes like interaction and connections. So isn't that like part of Asian martial art training to a large extent?
Yes, I won't make really the difference to other Asian martial arts, especially because there's this fantasy to, yeah, wearing the white gi, let's say karate or aikido, all these martial arts. You're wearing a uniform, which is usually white or very clean. And I think this idea, this fantasy, which is evoked through Asian martial arts in a Latin American society, which is very chaotic, they just see this cleanliness and thinking, okay, that is it. What is happening here, or which is the specialty of Taekwondo in this case, is Taekwondo in Argentina, because there is this ITF and the WTF, which is a Korean martial art that had been very much adopted into the context. The president of, for example, this ITF logo is Argentinian. So it is very adapted to it, and there has been this change thanks to the law, but we don't know whether the law is now applicable or not, because it's still in this kind of revision. Nobody knows what's going to happen, and are these changes going on.
All right, the gentleman right here.
Two questions. One's actually a follow-on, but they both ask you to think a little more deeply about articulating your theory. Actually, it's following on both of the last two comments. On this issue of different styles and inclusivity versus equality, right? And yeah, I agree that you could have both things. But I wouldn't give up the idea of equality maybe quite as fast as Paul would. If you think about Victor Turner's work, where Turner is talking about theater performance, ritual, and the construction of identity, one of the things that you can do in this kind of a training session, or this training situation, is you can create communitas. You can create a real sense of equality, but how you do that is by depriving people of their identity, and I mean depriving them physically of it, harshly, right? So in this classical ritual way, you strip everybody naked and you leave them cold and hungry, and you beat them around the head with a stick. And after about 2 weeks of that, everyone decides, yeah, we're pretty much all equal here, right? You know, and that's when you begin to inculcate a new lesson. And so then when you go back and you think about LeBlanc, you think about training in the gym, you know, that's a lot like what Victor Turner is describing, right? You know, we're not just creating a sense of identity that someone can be included in. We are systematically stripping away previous identities that people had before they entered the boxing gym, right? And so now this question of, well, how does Taekwondo stack up, and these specific schools, how do they stack up against other training environments, becomes really, really important, because it's going to speak to Paul's question about inclusivity versus, you know, actual equality. You want to talk to that and I'll ask the other question?
And I might kindly ask you to do it very short, as we expanded already our time frame.
Yes, I totally agree with you that there are certain rituals that you have to follow going into the dojang, and that certain habits are deprived or have to be deprived then. But I think it's here a way that we have to look on more deeply. I have to admit, more deeply into the dojang and look into how how it is constituted there. So following much longer than I did. So I was just. So the first time I was there, it was just for a little bit, and I didn't focus on it. But I kept on thinking. And the second time I was there, I was running from dojang to dojang, having looks into it, practicing a bit. But here I have to acknowledge that I have to go deeper into it. But that's a really good comment to elaborate it further in the next fieldwork. Thank you.